You know, it feels like such a modern problem, right? Trying to figure out if a spiritual teacher is the real deal or if a whole philosophy is just a dead end. Well, it turns out there's a guide for that, and it's about 2,500 years old. Today, we're diving into an ancient text, the Sandakasutta. It's basically a timeless masterclass in critical thinking that is just as sharp today as it was back then.
So here's our roadmap. We're going to start with a seeker and a sage in a scene of total chaos. Then we'll unpack 4 really bad philosophies and 4 types of teachers you just can't trust. After we've cleared away the junk, we'll look at what a path that actually works looks like, explore a really cool paradox about perfection, and wrap up with a pretty heavy personal choice.
Okay. So the story kicks off with a scene that might feel a little familiar. Imagine a group of about 500 spiritual seekers all hanging out together. But they're not meditating, oh no. The text says they're making an uproar, a dreadful racket. They're deep in what's called low talk, gossiping about politics, wars, money, scandals. It's just a wall of spiritual noise.
And then, all of a sudden, everything just stops. The leader of this noisy crew, a guy named Sandaka, spots someone coming. It's Ananda, one of the Buddha's main disciples. And Sandaka immediately tells everyone to shut down the noise. He knows that Ananda and his friends are, quote, educated to be quiet and praise the quiet. The arrival of this one calm person just completely shatters the chaos.
Sandaka sees this incredible contrast, his loud, gossiping group versus the peaceful vibe of Ananda. So he invites him over and basically says, look, forget all our useless chatter. Give us the real stuff. Tell us about your path. And that one question kicks this whole thing off. What really separates a true spiritual path from all the fakes out there?
Ananda is happy to oblige, and he lays out a framework that he got from the Buddha. He starts with what he calls 4 ways that negate the spiritual life. Think of these as philosophical black holes. If any teaching is built on one of these ideas, you might as well not even bother. Any effort you make is totally wasted from the start.
Okay, so the first dead end is basically pure materialism, or nihilism. This teacher says nothing you do matters. Good or bad. There's no afterlife, no point in being generous. When you die, that's it. You're just gone. The text even calls the idea of giving to others a doctrine of morons, because in this worldview, it doesn't matter if you're wise or foolish, kind or cruel, you all end up as dust.
But here's the genius of Ananda's argument. He doesn't get into a big metaphysical debate. He just applies a simple common sense test. Any reasonable person would hear that and go, wait a second. If the teacher who practices self-denial and the person who just lives comfortably both end up as nothing, why in the world would I choose the difficult path? What's the point? And realizing this, they just walk away.
The second philosophy is even more extreme. This is the amoralist. This teacher says there is no such thing as good or evil. You could literally go on a killing spree, and according to this teaching, no evil comes of that. On the flip side, you could be the kindest, most generous person ever, and no merit comes of that. The universe just doesn't care about morality at all.
And again, the same logic applies. Why bother with self-control? Why practice compassion if you end up in the same place as someone who lives a life of total self-indulgence and cruelty? It makes the whole idea of a spiritual practice seem completely absurd. It's just another dead end.
All right, dead end number 3, fatalism. This teacher claims we have no control. There's no real reason why we're good or bad. We're just molded by destiny, circumstance, and nature. There's no free will, no human effort that can change things. Everything that happens to you, good or bad, was always going to happen. You're just a passenger.
And the problem here is pretty obvious, right? If you have absolutely no control, if your fate is totally sealed, then what is the point of a spiritual practice? Why try to be better? This view makes any personal effort completely meaningless. Ananda actually lays out a 4th dead end, which is another flavor of this determinism, but the takedown is the same for all of them. They make trying pointless.
But it's not just about the big ideas. After dismantling these flawed philosophies, Ananda pivots to the teachers themselves. He says, look, even if the philosophy isn't an obvious dead end, the teacher might be unreliable. And he gives us 4 types of guides that you just can't trust.
First up is a classic, the guru who claims to be all-knowing, all-seeing, all the time. They say their perfect knowledge is always on, while walking, standing, sleeping, and waking. But then, life happens. They get bitten by a dog. They wander into town and can't find a meal. They get lost and have to ask for directions. Their actual life just doesn't match up with their grand claims.
So the test here is just simple observation. A thinking person would look at this and realize, this whole thing is unreliable. The teacher might make excuses like, oh, I meant to get bitten by that dog, but it doesn't pass the sniff test. The marketing and the product are two totally different things. It's a huge red flag.
The next three types are just as flaky. You've got the dogmatist who says it's true because it's in our tradition, but hey, traditions can be wrong or remembered incorrectly. Then there's the rationalist who relies only on their own logic, but anybody's logic can be faulty or biased. And my personal favorite, the eel wriggler. This is someone who is so dull that when you ask a straight question, they just twist and turn and flip-flop to avoid giving you a clear answer on anything.
So after Ananda has systematically torn down all these faulty systems and untrustworthy teachers, Sandaka asks the million-dollar question. Okay, so what does a path that actually works look like? What is a real spiritual life where your efforts actually pay off? What does that feel like?
Ananda's answer here is so powerful. He doesn't describe a set of beliefs you have to swallow. He describes a process, a training regimen. It starts with cleaning up your mind, giving up the hindrances. That leads to these incredibly deep states of meditation or samadhi. And from that stable mental place, you can develop real direct insight. You can see past lives, you can understand how karma works for yourself, and finally, you can end the inner poisons of greed, hate, and delusion and become free. The whole point is that it's a verifiable, step-by-step transformation.
But Sandaka is no slouch. He's been paying close attention. And he asks this brilliant follow-up question that gets to a really subtle, really important point about what perfection even means. And it's a direct shot at that first unreliable guru we talked about.
He asks, so does a truly perfected person, a liberated one, walk around 24/7, thinking to themselves, I'm liberated, I'm liberated, I'm liberated? Is that awareness just constantly running, even when they're asleep? It's such a great question because it's a direct challenge to that all-knowing guru's claim of constant, unbroken awareness.
And Ananda's answer is just, it's a work of art. He uses this incredible simile. He says, well, imagine a person whose hands and feet have been cut off. Are they constantly aware of it every single second, or do they just know it's a fact whenever they check? And Sandaka gets it instantly. They know it when they check. Ananda says it's the exact same for a perfected one. Their freedom is a fundamental reality they can access any time they want, not some thought they have to keep repeating in their head. This whole dialogue, so clear, so practical, so honest, it has a huge effect on Sandaka and all his followers. And the story now builds to its final conclusion, which is, well, it's both powerful and really bittersweet. It all comes down to a final choice.
Sandaka, totally impressed, asks, so how many people actually succeed on this path? Is it just a few? And Ananda's answer is amazing. He says, oh, not just 100 or 2, 3, 4, or 500, but many, many more than that. He's not bragging. He's just saying, yes, this path is effective. It works. Many people have walked it all the way to the end.
And now we get to the final, really poignant moment. Sandaka turns to his own 500 followers and tells them, go. The real spiritual life is over there with the Buddhist teaching. But then he says something incredibly honest about himself. He says, it's not easy for me to give up my possessions, my honor, my popularity right now. He sees the true path, crystal clear, but he feels like he can't walk it himself. He's too attached to being a guru. He sends his students to freedom, but he stays behind.
And what that shows us is that the Sandakasutta isn't just some dusty old story. It's a user's manual for spiritual clarity. It gives us a whole set of tests we can apply to any teacher, any teaching. Sandaka himself used them, and he saw the difference, but he felt he couldn't act on it. And that leaves us with the final question, the one we have to answer for ourselves. In our own lives, how do we use this framework to tell the difference between a path with real substance and what the text so bluntly calls a doctrine of morons? And when we see the difference, what choice will we make?